Now we're going to talk about how we can make you a better CSS coder in more efficient ways to make your job easier and to make it easier for other people to work with your code that you create and to make you more efficient and faster. So let's get into some of the best practices of how you should work in CSS. One really important thing is that as you're working is to make sure that your code is readable. This means giving it good space, making it where you comment things to make it understood, following a set of kind of standards that we're going to go over, and following and making sure you do this with good spacing really helps you to comprehend what you're reading, and for other developers to be able to see what you're doing, think about how you're doing it, and for them to make changes to the code that you have created. And in a selfish way, me as a professor, it also makes it easier for me to grade to see what you were doing and how you were thinking about solving the problem. I also want you to be organized. If you organize your CSS file in a way that lets you find and move through it, then you're going to be able to create content faster and also be able to go in and fix things faster and find it later. So the way I tend to do it is I take a top-down approach, starting with the big structural things at the top, and then working down the page. So something that's in the upper third of the page is probably going to be in the upper half of my CSS file. Something that's in the middle is probably likely to be in the middle of mine, and then things that are at the bottom will probably be at the end of the file. And that'll just be an easier way to help you find it. Now, I also like to create a kind of a table of contents that basically shows which what items are where, and so you can comment this out at the top of the page, which will help you to stay organized and to follow that. A big key thing to make it where you know what you're doing and you're not going to make as many mistakes is to be consistent in your file names, consistent in your structure, and kind of how you go about doing things. And so staying to that. One of the ways we do this is by what class names we choose. So as you know, we can choose any class name that we want, but just because we can choose anything doesn't mean we should. So the typical standard is when you have two words is that you use a hyphen between them and you keep it lowercase. When we do JavaScript, we might do so. We're going to do something different. But here in CSS, what we're going to do is your class names should be with a dash between them. So if you can see in this example, my style. By doing this, you won't ever have to wonder, wait, which one did I do? If you always stay consistent, you'll know whenever you type a class name that has two words, you'll know exactly what you were intending and how you previously wrote it. One way to be fast is to build the HTML structure first. So you're going to start with the frame of your page. So go in and put in your headers and your footers and your content, and then the sub pieces of that. If you can do about 85% of your HTML in a structured way, doing that HTML first will make it much more efficient instead of having to go back and forth between documents. If you get about 85% of your HTML done first, then do the CSS, that's really going to be the most efficient way to work. A couple of little things that people tend to forget, but making sure you get the right doc type. This was more important in kind of older versions. Here and now, the HTML5 is really, we just need to declare at the top the HTML version that we're doing. And it's helpful to put a med tag as to what meta type we're doing, or what character set, I should say. But when we're going to validate our code, you want to make sure that it knows which version of HTML you're doing. And so we want to make sure that our tag at the top has HTML in it. If you're using, HTML4 or something earlier, it's a much longer declaration. But the great thing about HTML5 is it's really all you have to do is put HTML at the top. We have lots of different ways of building CSS and controlling that. And we want to make sure that we understand the differences. So block versus inline. And I'm going to read this to you to make sure we get this. So block elements are elements that naturally clear each line after they are declared. So think about like a return in Word, like it breaks to a new line. So a p tag obviously makes a new line, but there's a lot of others. A div is one that will give space immediately afterwards. But inline elements take only as much space as they need and don't force a new line. So a great way to think about it is I can span across, I can put things in smaller spaces, and it doesn't break down to a new line. So inline stays on the same line. That's the best way to remember it. The reason I bring this up is because sometimes I see students using them interchangeably, and they really shouldn't. So block level elements give you that extra line and can help you with building out your structure. But inline elements like bold or italics, those types of things, and then spans are one of the more common ones that we use a lot. But you can see there's a lot of them here. But block level elements like a div, the H tags, the Ps, those all give you that extra line. Comments are really important in how we communicate to future developers, but also to yourself. So a lot of times you'll work on a project and then you'll need to change something a year or so later. How do you remember what you were thinking, what you were doing? Put in comments. We also want to make sure that we combine multiple elements to make our code as efficient and easy to change as possible. So you see here in this example, if we want all three of these different H tags to have the same font family and color, then we can just separate them with a comma and put them in the same declaration. And so that'll make things a lot easier, and so you have less code to write. So if you find yourself writing the same thing over and over, you need to look at your inheritance and see if you have inherited things differently. Can you put it at a higher level of an item, like putting it in the body tag, declaring that font or whatever in the body, or can you do it by combining elements like we do see here? Compound classes is really what makes Bootstrap, and we'll get into that later, but what makes HTML work where you have multiple classes applying to the same div. And so you can see in this example on this line 20 that we have a class for the column medium 4. We have a class for making it like black, for handling it as a box, and for floating it to the right. So you could create one class called the quote box, for example, and the quote box to the right. But we could also make a bunch of little subclasses, and then those subclasses all get applied to the same div, and that way we can use them interchangeably. So I could have this div for column 4 black box, but maybe I want to float it to the left. And so I can have a left and a right one just by adding this class. And so this makes it much more efficient. And as you learn how to use these, for example, like the box method, maybe you write something that's just a border 2 pixels gray that automatically gives you a box, and you have that piece of code sitting in your CSS. So when you're writing your HTML, you can automatically just generate a quick box to see. Those are the types of things that are going to make you more efficient. And by doing multiple or compound classes on the same HTML document can give you real great control over how that looks. We also want to choose the right unit of measure. So we can measure things in lots of different ways. We can use percentages. We can use points or pixels, which these are the most common ones, but we also have several others like view height, vertical height. We have the viewport's width. These are all dynamic things. They change with the width of the page. So if I said I want it to be an EM, for example. So EM stands for the size of the M and whatever font size we have. So if you change the font size, you're obviously going to change what that unit of measure is. And so 2 EMs could grow if I change my font size from 12 to 24, I double it. Well, then that 2 EM became the equivalent of what was 4 EM. And so we want to learn how to use these. You can practice each one of them and kind of see how they're doing it. The most common ones that we will use are pixels, points, percentages, and EMs. There's great power in an unordered list. List items allow us to have structure to our page. And typically when it was originally created, it was for putting the kind of the disk and kind of just doing text in that. But we can apply CSS to each list item and get great value out of it. So we can make them all horizontal. We can make a nice menu out of that. We can do drop-down menus. We can create a lot of structure to our page by using the unordered list. So you'll see a lot of examples in code of how people have used lists in unique ways. A lot of it is around menu items and how we structure the menu, but there's really great power in this. And so I encourage you to, whenever possible, if you can make something a list item that's going to be repeating, that could be a really good way to have nice structured HTML with easy to code CSS. Now, I want you to validate all of your code, both your HTML and your CSS. This is going to help you to find errors. It's going to help you to know what's wrong and what you need to work on and what you need to fix. And so if you can validate your HTML, and you can use any online CSS validator, so just CSS3, HTML5 validators to run a report on your code and then go in and fix the things that they suggest. Now, you're going to be working and putting this into practice, and we're going to get into the assignment for you to practice your CSS.